Today we're looking at the Three-Fifths Compromise. Hello, welcome to the Daily Bell Ringer. Please don't forget to subscribe and take a look at the questions down in the description. The Three-Fifths Compromise was a compromise that was reached during the Constitutional Convention of 1787, in which delegates from each state were sent to draft a new constitution for the United States. The issue was representation in Congress. They agreed that the Senate would have equal representation, with each state having 2 representatives, but they also agreed that population would determine how many representatives each state would receive in the House of Representatives. So, the more people that lived within a state, the more representatives that a state would have to elect to the House. Here's where the Three-Fifths Compromise came into play. And this compromise is not something that we as Americans should be proud of in our nation's history. But Southern states at the Constitutional Convention argued that they should receive additional representatives based on the fact that they had a large population of enslaved people living in their states. Despite the fact that they treated enslaved Africans as property and they were not given citizenship or any rights, Southerners still wanted enslaved people to be counted in population counts in order to receive more representatives in the House of Representatives. Northern states argued that only free inhabitants of each state should be counted in the population counts. Some northern states argued that southern states could now control representation in Congress by enslaving more Africans.
What just happened? What is he saying? They argue about the slavery being capitalized. Right. So they're arguing about whether they should count the slaves or whether they shouldn't count the slaves. Why? Why this argument right now? Alexis. Yes, they want more representatives for the government. So counting the slaves will do that for them. If you just answer that question, I believe you clarified on the list. So we're going to continue watching. Keep in mind that they want to count the slaves because they want more representation in the government.
Another aspect to consider of the debate that occurred at the Constitutional Convention was the fact that not only representation was based on population, but also federal tax contribution would be based on population. So if southern states did indeed get what they wanted and every enslaved individual counted towards their overall population, that would also mean that they would have to pay more taxes to the federal government. So the debate went on into mid-June of 1787, and it became a very heated debate. In fact, some southern states threatened to leave the Constitutional Convention if the issue was not settled. James Wilson of Pennsylvania and Charles Pinckney of South Carolina proposed a compromise that the enslaved population of southern states would only be counted as 3/5 of their actual number. So in other words, for example, if population counts counted 1,000 enslaved people, they would only be counted as 600 in the population count. And the Continental Congress accepted this 3/5 compromise plan, which basically meant an enslaved person really only had the value of 3/5 of a person. And interestingly, in the actual compromise, which was in Article 1, Section 2, Clause 3 of the Constitution, the word slave or slavery is never used in describing this agreement. Again, going back to the fact that the Constitutional Convention did not truly want to take on the issue of slavery, since so many there were slaveholders themselves and did not want to give up the institution. Instead, enslaved people were simply termed as all other persons in the Constitution. This compromise would have a long-lasting impact on American politics and history. The compromise basically gave southern slaveholding states more power in Congress than what their true population dictated. So for example, in 1812, southern states had 76 of 143 seats in the House of Representatives, despite the fact that they should have only had 59 based on their free population.
What did you say? What did you talk about? When you talked about numbers, 59, 76, 143. How many? What about the population?
And of course, having 76 out of 143 meant that they had over half of the seats, which made them able to pass laws that were favorable to Southern states. And also, these unfair numbers helped Southern states to heavily influence who would be Speaker of the House and control other political offices. And between the years of the Constitution being written in 1787 to the beginning of the Civil War in 1860, barely 70 years later, the enslaved population in Southern states exploded. In 1810, it was estimated that there were just over 1 million enslaved people, but by 1860, that number had jumped to right at 4 million enslaved people. With the outbreak of the Civil War in 1861, the days of the institution of slavery in America were numbered. Abraham Lincoln, of course, issued the Emancipation Proclamation, really making the war about ending slavery, and then slavery was permanently abolished with the 13th Amendment in 1865. The 14th Amendment, which gave former enslaved people citizenship and equal legal rights, superseded or basically removed the Three-Fifths Compromise. The Three-Fifths Compromise is yet another example of the negative impact the institution of slavery had on American history. By denying full human rights to people simply because of the color of their skin, the nation put itself at risk, and of course, it led to the bloodiest war in American history and a long history of racial conflict and discrimination.